Spring, 1858. On a quiet plantation in the American South, something happened inside the Whitmore house that no one expected. The master's young wife stood at the bottom of the staircase, her ankle badly injured. She looked across the room and called a slave by name. "Samuel, carry me upstairs." The servants froze, because moments like that could change a man's life forever. Samuel lifted her carefully and carried her into the mistress's bedroom. Then the door closed behind them. But the real shock came later that night, when the plantation owner returned home and revealed a secret buried inside the Whitmore family for more than 20 years. A secret that suggested something impossible. The slave everyone called Samuel might share the blood of the Whitmore family itself. The Whitmore plantation sat along a slow river in the American South. From a distance it looked peaceful. Tall oak trees, wide fields of corn, and the large white house that watched over everything. But anyone who lived there knew the truth. A plantation could look calm on the outside, while carrying 1,000 silent stories inside. Samuel had lived on that land for most of his life. No one remembered exactly when he arrived. Some said he had been brought there as a small boy. Others believed he came from another plantation further south. Samuel himself remembered almost nothing about those early years. Only pieces. A woman's voice, the smell of wood smoke, and the long road that brought him to Whitmore land. By the time he was grown, he had become one of the strongest men on the plantation. Tall, quiet, careful with every word he spoke. The other workers respected him, not because he fought or argued, but because he carried himself with a strange calm dignity, even in a place built on control. Inside the big house lived Eleanor Whitmore. She had arrived 2 years earlier as the new wife of Master Whitmore. The servants quickly noticed something different about her. She was not cruel. Not openly. But she was distant, lonely in a way that large houses sometimes create. Many evenings she would stand near the upstairs window and look out across the fields, watching the workers return at sunset, watching Samuel among them. On the evening everything began, Eleanor slipped on the staircase. The doctor from the nearby town came quickly. After examining her ankle, he shook his head. "You must stay off your feet for several days." When the doctor left, the house servants gathered quietly in the hallway. No one spoke. Eleanor stood at the bottom of the staircase, leaning slightly against the railing. Her eyes moved across the room, until they stopped on Samuel. "Samuel," she said softly, "please carry me upstairs." The room fell silent, because requests like that were rare and dangerous. Samuel stepped forward slowly. He lowered his head the way he had been taught since childhood. "Yes, ma'am." He lifted her gently in his arms. The scent of lavender from her dress filled the air. One by one the servants turned their heads away, pretending not to watch, because everyone understood something important about life on a plantation. Sometimes the most dangerous moments were the quiet ones. Samuel carried Eleanor slowly up the wide staircase. Each step echoed softly through the quiet house. Her arm rested lightly around his shoulder, so she would not lose balance. From this close, he could feel how small and fragile she seemed, very different from the distant figure who usually moved through the house like a ghost. The lamps along the wall flickered as they passed. Their shadows stretched long across the wooden panels. When they reached the top of the stairs, Samuel stopped outside the bedroom door. He hesitated. "You may bring me inside," Eleanor said gently. Samuel pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped into the room. The air inside smelled faintly of lavender and candle wax. He carried her to the bed and lowered her carefully onto the edge. As soon as she was steady, he stepped back immediately. His eyes dropped toward the floor. That was the rule. Always step back. Always keep distance. Always remember your place. But Eleanor did not look away. Instead, she watched him quietly, as if studying something she had never noticed before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the wind outside the window moved the curtains. Then Eleanor broke the silence. "Samuel." He lifted his head slightly. "Yes, ma'am." The doctor left bandages on the table. She nodded toward the small wooden desk beside the bed. "Could you bring them here?" "Of course, ma'am." Samuel walked across the room and picked up the folded cloth. When he returned, Eleanor lifted the edge of her dress just enough to reveal her injured ankle. Samuel knelt carefully. His movements were slow and precise. He wrapped the bandage gently, making sure the cloth rested firmly without tightening too much. Eleanor watched him the entire time. "You are very careful," she said quietly. Samuel kept his eyes lowered. "I'm just doing what I was told, ma'am." Another silence followed. This one longer, more uncomfortable. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the distant fields. A storm was building. When Samuel finished tying the bandage, he stood up again. He was already turning toward the door. But Eleanor spoke again. "Samuel, wait." He stopped instantly. "You work a great deal on this plantation," she said slowly. "Do you ever rest?" Samuel hesitated. "Not much, ma'am." A small, sad smile appeared on her face. "This house is very quiet," she said. "Too quiet sometimes." Samuel did not respond. Conversations like this made him uneasy. Then Eleanor surprised him again. "You may sit for a moment." She pointed to the chair near the window. Samuel looked confused. No servant sat inside the mistress's room. Not ever. "It's all right," she added softly. "I asked you to stay." Slowly, Samuel moved toward the chair. He sat on the very edge, ready to stand again if needed. For a few minutes, they spoke quietly. About the weather. About the river that ran near the plantation. About the long cornfields stretching toward the forest. It was the strangest conversation Samuel had ever had in that house. Not commands. Not orders. Just words. Then suddenly, a door slammed downstairs. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway below. Samuel stood up immediately. He already knew that sound. "Master Whitmore," he said quietly. Eleanor's face turned pale. Her husband had been away for several days on business. No one expected him to return tonight. The footsteps moved closer. Boots striking the wooden floor with slow, deliberate weight. Samuel stepped toward the door. "I should go, ma'am." But before he could reach the handle, the bedroom door burst open. Master Whitmore stood in the doorway. Rain soaked his coat. Water dripped from the brim of his hat. His eyes moved across the room. First to Eleanor sitting on the bed, then to Samuel standing inside the room. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to stop the air itself. "What is this?" Whitmore asked slowly. Samuel lowered his head immediately. His hands remained still at his sides. "Sir," he said quietly, "I was helping the mistress with her ankle." Whitmore did not respond right away. Instead, he stepped slowly into the room, each step deliberate, heavy. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boots. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the floor. His eyes moved back to Eleanor. "You asked him to bring you here." Eleanor kept her voice calm. "Yes, my ankle is injured. The doctor said I should not walk." Whitmore studied her face carefully, then his eyes shifted back to Samuel. There was something different in his expression. Not anger, not exactly, suspicion. He had been a plantation owner for many years, and men like him learned to watch carefully, to notice things others ignored. "How long were you in this room?" he asked. Samuel answered honestly, "Only a few minutes, sir." Whitmore looked around the room slowly. The chair near the window, the bandage on Eleanor's ankle. The distance Samuel kept between himself and the bed. Then something unexpected happened. Whitmore raised his hand slightly. "Leave us." Samuel nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He stepped past the master and walked into the hallway. Behind him, the bedroom door closed. Downstairs, the servants were waiting, pretending to work, pretending not to listen. Old Martha stood near the kitchen doorway. She had worked in that house longer than anyone alive. Her eyes followed Samuel as he came down the stairs. "What happened?" she whispered. Samuel shook his head. "Nothing. Just helping the mistress." But even as he said the words, he felt uneasy. Because sometimes, on a plantation, doing nothing wrong still brought trouble. Outside, the rain had begun falling harder. The fields disappeared into darkness beyond the lanterns. Samuel stepped out onto the porch and sat near the stable. The cool air helped calm his thoughts. He stared out across the land, the same land he had worked since he was a boy. Yet tonight something felt different. Like a door had opened somewhere. Upstairs, inside the bedroom, Whitmore stood by the window. His arms folded across his chest. Eleanor watched him carefully. "You seem very suspicious," she said. Whitmore didn't answer at first. The rain tapped steadily against the glass. "I returned home unexpectedly," he said slowly. "And the first thing I see is that young man standing inside my wife's room. There was nothing improper." Eleanor replied firmly. Whitmore turned to face her, his sharp eyes searching her expression. For a moment the room was completely silent. Then Whitmore spoke again, but his voice had changed. Lower, quieter. "You believe I am worried about scandal?" Eleanor frowned slightly. "Then what are you worried about?" Whitmore walked closer to the bed, his expression unreadable. "That young man, Samuel." He paused for a long moment before continuing. "There is something about him that you do not know." Eleanor felt a strange chill move through her body. "What do you mean?" Whitmore glanced toward the closed door, making sure no one could hear. Then he spoke in a quiet voice. "Samuel did not come to this plantation the way people think." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Whitmore let out a slow breath. "My brother brought him here many years ago, when the boy was still very young." Eleanor waited, her heart beating faster. "And before my brother died," Whitmore continued, "he told me something he had kept secret for many years." Whitmore looked directly into her eyes. "He believed the boy's mother once worked in this house." Eleanor's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "And?" Whitmore's answer came slowly, carefully. "He believed Samuel might be connected to this family, in ways no one has ever spoken about." The room fell completely silent. Eleanor stared at him, trying to understand what he meant. "Connected how?" she asked. Whitmore held her gaze. "They believed Samuel might be the son of someone from this house." Eleanor felt the words settle heavily in the room. For a moment, she could not speak. "The son of someone in this house," she repeated quietly. Whitmore nodded once, slowly. "My brother believed it for years," he said, "but he never proved it." Eleanor's thoughts raced. There were many possibilities, too many. "Whose son?" she asked carefully. Whitmore did not answer right away. Instead, he walked toward the fireplace. His hands rested on the wooden mantel as he stared into the dying embers. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more controlled. "My brother believed the boy's father was our own father." Eleanor felt the room grow colder. "If that were true," she said slowly, "Samuel would be." Whitmore finished the sentence. "My half-brother." Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. The rain continued outside, steady against the windows. For years the plantation had lived under a strict order. Masters above, workers below. Rules that no one questioned. But the thought now hanging in the air threatened that entire order.
Eleanor broke the silence first. Does Samuel know? Whitmore shook his head. No. And he never needed to. Eleanor looked at him sharply. He deserves to know the truth. Whitmore gave a bitter smile. You do not understand this land yet. If word spreads that a man in the fields carries Whitmore blood, nothing on this plantation will remain the same. Eleanor studied him. For the first time since she had known him, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Fear. Not fear of Samuel, but fear of what the truth might destroy. Later that night, Whitmore made a decision. He ordered one of the servants to bring Samuel back to the house. Samuel returned quietly through the front door, his hat in his hands, rain still falling outside. The large front room felt strangely tense. Whitmore stood near the table. Eleanor sat beside the lamp. Samuel stopped a few steps away. You asked for me, sir. Whitmore studied him carefully, as if seeing him for the first time. The longer he looked, the more small details appeared. The shape of the jaw, the eyes. The calm posture. Things that reminded him, uncomfortably, of his own family. Samuel waited patiently. Finally Eleanor spoke. Her voice softer than before. Samuel, there are some things about your past that we are beginning to understand. Samuel looked confused. My past, ma'am. Whitmore stepped forward slowly. For many years, he said, everyone believed you came here as a child from another plantation. But that story may not be the truth. Samuel frowned slightly. I don't remember much before I arrived here. Whitmore nodded. That is exactly the problem. He took a slow breath, the weight of years pressing on him. Samuel. There is reason to believe you were born closer to this house than you realize. Samuel stood still, trying to understand. Whitmore continued, your mother once worked here. And according to my brother, your father may have been a Whitmore. The words hung in the air. Heavy, unbelievable. Samuel did not move, did not speak. The quiet man who had spent his life in the fields suddenly felt the ground shift beneath him. Because if what the master said was true, then everything he believed about his life was about to change.
Samuel stood in the middle of the room. The words he had just heard did not feel real. For most of his life he had been told only one thing, work, obey, do not ask questions. Now suddenly the past he never understood was standing directly in front of him. My mother, Samuel said slowly, I never knew her name. Whitmore nodded once, her name was Isla. Samuel repeated the name quietly, Isla. The word felt unfamiliar, yet strangely close. Eleanor watched him carefully. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the weight of a truth that had arrived too suddenly. Whitmore spoke again, my brother believed our father may have been the one responsible. He was never certain. But the timing, the resemblance, it was enough to make him wonder. Samuel looked down at the floor, trying to make sense of something that changed everything. If what the master believed was true, then the life Samuel had lived on that plantation had been built on a terrible contradiction. A man working in the fields, who might share blood with the family that owned the land. Samuel lifted his head slowly, what happens now? Whitmore did not answer immediately, for years he had buried this possibility. Pretended it did not exist, but now the truth had stepped into the open. And it could not easily be pushed back into silence. Finally he spoke. Nothing changes tonight,
but things cannot remain the same forever. Eleanor looked between the two men. For the first time she realized something important. Samuel had always carried himself with quiet dignity, not like a man who believed he was less than others. Now she understood why. Samuel nodded slowly. I don't know if what you say is true. But it doesn't change who I am. The words surprised Whitmore. Most men in Samuel's position might have reacted with anger, or disbelief. Instead, Samuel remained calm, the same steady man he had always been. Whitmore studied him for a long moment, then he said something unexpected. My brother once told me something before he died. He said, if the truth ever came out, the boy should be given a chance to choose his own future. Eleanor looked at him. You never told anyone that. Whitmore shook his head. No, because I never expected the moment to arrive. The storm outside had begun to fade. The rain softened against the windows. Samuel stood quietly. The room felt different now. As if the house itself had heard the truth. Whitmore finally spoke again. You will not return to the fields tomorrow. Samuel looked surprised. There are matters we must investigate. Whitmore continued, if what my brother believed is true, your place on this land cannot remain the same. Eleanor felt something shift in the air. Not justice, not yet. But the beginning of something that had never been allowed before. Truth. Samuel nodded slowly. I only ask one thing. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. What is that? Samuel answered quietly, I want to know who my mother really was. Whitmore looked toward the dark window. Somewhere beyond the fields, somewhere in the buried past of the plantation, then that is where we begin. And on that quiet, stormy night in 1858, a secret that had been buried inside the Whitmore house for more than 20 years, finally began to rise into the light. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive with noise, sometimes it begins with something much smaller. A simple request. Samuel, will you carry me upstairs?